Hello, welcome to this Pipe Talk about Oxford hymn settings for organists. My name is Rebecca Tivelli, and I'm joined today by David Blackwell of Oxford, England. David and I are the co-editors for volumes 1 to 6 of this series. David was for many years the head of music at Oxford University Press, and he is now a freelance composer and editor. And I am organist and director of music at First Presbyterian Church in Stillwater, Oklahoma. Hello, David.
Hi, Becky. It's lovely to see you, and it's lovely to be taking part in this special presentation for AGO. Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining me for this, David. So, we would both like to thank the AGO Organ Fest 2021 for this wonderful opportunity to share with you the inside story about these books and this bicontinental project. We will be talking about the inspiration for the series, how it developed, and what the tasks were that we set for ourselves and our composers, the challenges and joys of the whole process, and finally, some things about the end results. So, to begin, the inspiration. David and I were talking about what organists need. What what is there that organists are needing? And we both settled on books of freshly composed, commissioned pieces on hymn tunes. So we started off with that and decided on a practical collection that would be aimed for the average church musician and to do the liturgical year. So one volume per season, or a couple seasons in each book sometimes. And that this would be a US and UK collaboration. So that's how we started off, right, David?
Absolutely right, yes. And we wanted to reflect in our books the very wide range of hymns in today's worship, including also praise songs or worship songs as they're known in Britain, and of course spirituals, both of which are really quite rich sources of hymnody in today's worship. And we wanted to put them alongside more traditional hymnody and Victorian hymns and so forth to create a collection really of use for today's church musician.
Absolutely. And from there, we set about figuring out what the parameters of the books would be.
We did indeed. We wanted it to serve all the major denominations. That was important. And I can remember having many a hymn book open in front of me, many of which I didn't really know, but just looking to see what hymns were in those books and which were the representative hymn tunes for the different denominations. We wanted it to be practical. You mentioned that, and this was a way of making it suitable to as wide a range of people as possible. You talked about the US UK collaboration, and that was another key aspect for us. We shortlisted names and came up with a list of fine composers, I think, on both sides. But this was a way, I think, of really giving our collection something a little different, something that could not only introduce new names to people in the different markets, but perhaps also different approaches and different styles. Because inevitably, really, when a British composer sits down to write a chorale prelude, they'll do it in a particular kind of way, depending on their tradition, and American composers the same. And it was lovely, I think, to represent that range in the books and introduce different approaches to all the purchases of it.
Yes, very much so. And it was lovely that the composers on both sides didn't hesitate if they were given a tune they didn't know. That was just
No,
fine.
they were very good at working with us, which was very nice. Um, Also, on the practical idea, we've given registrations for all the pieces, usually for a two manual instrument, occasionally for three, but we've also invited players to adapt the registrations to suit their own instruments. And some of the pieces can also be played quietly, perhaps a little slower before a service or more loudly as a recessional afterwards. So there's quite a lot of flexibility in the way that players can approach the pieces.
Absolutely. And with the registration suggestions we gave, we said, this is just a starting point. do what works, do what
Yeah.
you like. And actually, as a composer, I rarely play my own pieces the same way twice. So lots of flexibility.
That's interesting. Yeah, good. Yep. So we came up with this scheme of what we wanted to do. We went to our composers. Of course, life being what it is, things didn't always go entirely according to plan. Perhaps you can remember one or two moments there, Becky.
Well, yes, it was always interesting. It was a learning process all the way along, how to manage the workflow for one thing, the time differences and the communications between so many people, um, not just between you and me, but us and our composers,
Hmm.
and the deadlines, obviously, for submissions of pieces and trying to establish those
Yeah.
parameters as well.
Yeah, I remember even before we got to the point of sending tunes to composers, there were quite a lot of challenges for us as the editors to face, not least of which was just shaking down the vast range of possible hymn tunes we could have included into something manageable within the covers of one book. And just finding the representative tunes really within each tradition, and which also gave a nice range of types of pieces and hymn tunes was tricky.
Yeah.
And then, of course, there were some details, weren't there, of some of the hymn tunes. They didn't always match market to market. Do you have any memory of that problem?
Very much. And I remember our charts, the Excel files, and the hymn tunes and the keys and the seasons and which tune might go to which side
Yeah,
and whittling those down, oftentimes 50 or more hymn tunes down to whatever it was we needed to fit into the pages of the book.
yeah. I remember that some tunes were known in the UK but not in the US, or vice versa. And some tunes, surprisingly, I think, were known on both sides but were included in different seasons. So
Mhm.
the hymn tune Elicum was firmly established as an Easter hymn over here, but in the American market, you told me was a Lent and Passiontide hymn. So that was interesting and presented its own challenge.
Yes, indeed. There were a number of those. And then in the end, we decided to duplicate some of those tunes because they were so firmly identified in one season or another on the two sides of the ocean.
That's right. And as a practical guide, on the Oxford University Press website, there is an alphabetical index of all the hymn tunes, which is very helpful. You can look up the hymn tune and then you can find immediately which volume the setting is in if we've done it. So that's a good guide for players.
Yes, and if the tune is duplicated, it's done by two different composers, so that's also fun.
Yeah. One of the challenges we faced was getting the balance between an individual composer's creativity and also achieving some measure of homogeneity within the volumes themselves so that players weren't startled to have a piece in style A and turn the page and have something dramatically different in the next piece. And that was difficult sometimes and led to some diplomatic and gentle conversations. But here, I think I'd like to pay tribute really to all our composers, and I'm sure you join me in this, Becky, who were very willing and very professional in the way they set about assisting us really with this task and recognizing what we were doing and balancing it with what they wanted to do. It worked very well, I thought.
Yes, indeed. I mean, what a stellar group of people, and what an honor and privilege to work with all of them.
And one of the things, particularly that I think we do in the UK, perhaps a little more than publishers in the States, is um, work with composers on details in their pieces sometimes. We might really like the first bit and feel the middle bit could do with a bit of tweaking, or uh, just want them to polish certain aspects of it. And they again were very willing to listen. And sometimes they said, "Do you know what? I think it's fine as it is," and we went along with that because we came to their point of view. But it was a meeting of minds. It was a nice process.
Definitely was, and it was a very detailed process for everybody involved. And
yeah,
I remember also one of the challenges, we would have a certain number of pages per book that we
mm,
had to fit everything in. And so after we would get the pieces back, we would see what people had done and then have to judge how to make it all work within those
yeah,
page numbers. So occasionally there were adjustments that needed to be made. I remember particularly the autumn fall volume,
mm.
which has a lot of big hymn tunes for the big festivals in the fall. A lot of composers went big and long, and
Yeah, yeah,
and so there was a lot of finessing to make that book work in the end.
there was, because we wanted as far as possible to present pieces which people could see immediately were going to work for them in their very busy lives, preparing music on a week by week basis. And yes, some people do have the luxury of spending time learning a big and long piece, but sometimes they want something quite short that they can play more readily, and that meets the needs, I think, of players in a practical way.
Yes. And at the same time, some of these pieces work wonderfully in recitals, both,
Yeah,
I mean, of all styles, loud, soft, um, beautiful textures and registrations. They're wonderful concert pieces as well.
yeah, it's lovely to see that actually, isn't it? They're beginning to emerge on YouTube and performances popping up, and my thanks to all those great players out there who are taking the trouble to learn and play and record these pieces. It's really lovely to see. I think you're using some of them in teaching as well, Becky, aren't you?
Yes, I've used them, and a number of my colleagues I know, David Heller at Trinity University, has told me so often how he uses the books all the time with all of his students so that they have wonderful pieces not only for their performances and juries, but they have practical things when Sunday comes.
And in terms of teaching, there is the piece, but there's also the compositional style of the piece, which is occasionally educational as well. So one thing I'm quite proud of in the book is how we've managed to get in so many of the major types of genres that we encounter as organists: preludes, fugues, toccatas, choral preludes, fantasias, variations. All these very familiar forms to us as players are there, and it's great to see quite a lot of counterpoint. I mean, I know that sounds a bit strange, but I think composers really wrestled with the raw material of the tunes sometimes, which, as we all know, can be quite modest for some tunes. But they managed to find really quite interesting things to do with them. They can make them into canons and fugues, and that I think was is great. It really strengthens the piece, I think, to have that form behind it.
Exactly. And I think within the pieces, there's always interest for the player. There's things to
Yeah,
find.
yeah,
And so, I felt in the beginning that I was doing this project out of selfish reasons because I need these pieces. I need these pieces on the organ bench all year. And I know that every time I pull something out, there's going to be interest for me as the player to find
mm.
the composers did a lot of very clever things. And really, there's beautiful craftsmanship in the music.
Well, that's great. And though I say it myself, it sounds like we did our job.
Well, it was an amazing job. It was a educational job for sure, and just such a joy and privilege to work with you, David, and with all of our composers.
Well, likewise, Becky, thank you. You taught me a lot and introduced me to some great new composers. So thanks, thank you.
Thank you so much. And we thank everybody who's watched and listened, and we encourage you to look at the companion website for Oxford hymn settings for organists. Thank you. Much
Thank you.